Certainly the divine blessing shall accompany those who shed their ego. There is absolutely no distance between God and the self because the Shastras say they are one and the same, and there is nothing closer to the self than God. Our long existence of several births in their nature has built up a kind of conditioned ego in our own self, and the soul has isolated itself. The birth and growth of our ego is a very long story, and the very purpose of creation of the worlds, the creation of our bodies, the minds, the consciousness, and the interaction with the other living creatures, including humans, and the nature around is to give the soul that opportunity which enables the soul to reach God, to reach that God which is located within itself and get rid of its false conditioning. The Hindu Shastras say that creation is anugraha, grace. Creation itself is grace. The souls now have been created and veiled in ignorance, and the darkness of a false ego were lying in a corner of this space for long, not even wanting to receive the help of God, because the soul by itself is as good as any inanimate object like stone. Inherently, the soul has that very content of Chetana, or we can translate this Chetana as awareness, which is the nature of God Himself. While the Chetana of God is uninterrupted, never polluted, not diverted to anything external, that awareness of the soul became totally veiled in ignorance, and in this condition the souls were lying helpless. It was therefore necessary for the souls to be given that kind of awareness which brings the soul to life, bring the soul to think, act, understand its own real state, and at a point of time in its evolution of existence in nature, realize what it needs and what it has to do for its own realization, free from all conditioning and ignorance. With this purpose, the creation is made for the benefit of the soul. The nature gives an experience to the soul through the body, mind, senses, the pain, and the pleasure, and these are the instruments of education to the soul. In this sense, God has been gracious to create the world for the benefit of evolution and reach a state of awareness about original, primordial, pure, unconditioned, truthful nature of His own self. The acquisition of ignorance was also part of nature around Him in the earlier creations, and it had to go through the very same nature and further complete its travel by washing off its ignorance through the living in the very nature, very same nature. When I say God is not love, I mean God is not love for any particular soul or individual. His love, grace, and kindness to all the souls in one stroke, and He fulfilled His love by creation. Within the scope of nature and our existence in life, all our sorrows are, till we realize the very purpose of this creation being made for us. We undergo this punishment of suffering and duality till we wake up to understand our duty to ourselves. This is in general the concept of creation and its utility to the soul. The real journey begins when the soul reaches the limit of its suffering. It is only then that the importance of helping itself is realized. The beginning of that journey lies in getting rid of our attachments to the world and our ability to see those which are useful to us and those which are inimical to us is known as the basic wisdom. That wisdom is the starting point of our journey in the spiritual world. The journey ends in rejecting the world, never to go back to it again and returning to submit to the compulsions of nature and life, either by attraction or fear or sorrow, because the sorrow is an attachment and fear is also a relationship. Love is also a relationship that binds. Once these equations in the world are gone, his bounded existence in this world ceases and he is a freed soul. During this journey, we are bound to meet with detractions, attractions, doubts, answers with half truth, and so on till we reach the stage when no more doubts arise in our consciousness and no answer is sought outside of oneself. All doubts are not answered but removed. On an intellectual plane, when a question is asked, some answer is given. Then the man carries both the question and the answer together with him, which means the question is there in his consciousness with more information. Wisdom is that state of self-sufficiency without a possibility of a question arising in him at any time in future. Whether the question is about the political philosophy, religious philosophy, the laws of nature, the condition of other human beings, or the nature of sorrow, the essence of happiness, the purpose of living, the goal of life, and the diseases or its medicines. A final state is reached when the self abides in itself. It is then that the journey has been completed. And in this journey, who was our guide? Who was our philosopher? Who was our caretaker? Who gave us this wisdom ultimately? The answer simply is God, who pervades the nature including the mental, physical, conscious happiness or suffering. All the dualities of life springing forth from nature around us are equally pervaded by God. There is God in sorrow, there is God in pleasure, there is God in hunger, there is God in satiation, there is God in sleep, there is God in wakefulness. Even ignorance is pervaded by God because He is the creator, and having created, He pervades it. He entered it without exception all over, all through in everything from the minutest point to the largest heavenly body, equally distributing Himself, thereby wearing the robe of creation Himself and pervading through it. Tat srushya tadevana pravishat. Having created, He entered the creation. Therefore, in sin and merit, equally there is God. We have to understand the difference and differentiate between wisdom and ignorance, happiness and sorrow. We do receive the education in the state of duality. It is the experience of the hot sun that makes us seek the shade of a tree. Similarly, it is the experience of our ignorance and suffering from a state of ignorance that creates a desire in us to reach that wisdom. This desire to be free, this desire to be a fulfilled person within himself, in oneself, without the aid and help from any external sources, physical, mental, or philosophical. In that state, a man is really going to realize the God in himself. In this sense, the Advaita philosophy says you are God. You don't have to make a long journey from one point to another in space. You do not have to search for God anywhere. The closest thing for us that we can imagine is God. It is closer than your mind, closer than your heart, closer than your skin. It is the closest to your ego. The difficulty arises because the ego is outward looking. So the sadhana prescribes two ways. If you have to look outside, try to understand. Try to locate your own self in everything outside you. If it is not possible for you, try to locate the whole universe, which is the total personality of God, within yourself. In fact, in a little life of tapas, both these things are done all the time. One has to see God in everything, in the moving or the inanimate, in the scorpion, in the serpent, in the enemy as well as his friends, his honors, his rewards and friendship. If God is one and He pervades all these different things, he has to only understand that it is the same God which is his own self. He is pervading all that is manifestly different, apparently different but essentially not different. In essence, it is the same spirit that pervades. Identifying one's ego with that unity is called self-realization. The basic needs or the basic requirements of such a life is ability to put up with the hazards of life and take life as it is without demanding any change in the circumstances to suit his comfort or taste, and in the process of trying to alter the externalities of life to suit to one's own comfort and taste. The man fails more often than not, and every failure makes him more frustrated, helpless, and even lose his confidence. The Shastras have always prescribed a way of life by physical and mental actions to achieve a kind of purified state of mind and the consciousness. The word yajna is translated into English as sacrifice. What is the sacrifice we are making in the yajna? Why this word has come to denote yajna is interesting. Offering ghee or any good material to gods through fire itself is known as sacrifice. Those things that are good for you, desirable, tasty, and that are loved by you are offered to God. But the secret principle is offering them without a hope of any reward is sacrifice. In this sense, the ultimate purpose of yajna is to practice sacrifice. Otherwise, the relationship between man and God becomes only service and reward. Prayer and answer of God to the prayers, praying for anything and getting it from the Lord. There is no sacrifice involved in this. As long as there is desire, as long as something is done to fulfill that desire, as long as something is expected, there is no sacrifice. And that kind of a life is going to lead a man to greater and stronger bondage rather than freedom. It is only at the very beginner's stage that a man is asked to pray for the things he wants, so that he realizes that there is grace that has created the world and that is capable of giving him what he wants. Such teaching is only meant to establish a relationship between man and God, but that attitude has to evolve into a non-demanding, non-expecting equation and relationship, totally selfless with God. At one point of time, the Vedic ritual had obviously failed in the history of this country, and the yajnas became sources of desire fulfillment. When the ultimate message of Vedic ritual got lost in the minds of men, Buddha has come to this world to tell us about the futility of Vedic ritualism, when it is no more a sacrifice. Therefore, he said, stop this Vedic ritualism of an external nature that might encourage more desires in you rather than the spirit of sacrifice. He pointed to the ultimate purpose of freedom from desire through sacrifice, which is the ultimate message in the ancient past in the country. And if your Vedic religion and culture are coming in the way of redemption from all the desires, that religion is again one more bondage. It is one more conditioning. It does not lead the soul to self-realization, except that it has been used as a technical path, a karmic path to reach higher states of sensual happiness like heavens. The gods that are supposed to be living in heavens, they too have the need of reaching that one God, except that these higher beings in other world are enjoying greater comforts. In terms of wisdom about the self, they are living at the same distance as the human souls on the earth. So ultimately it has come to this point of conclusion that any religion, any philosophy, any physical and mental practices should never be allowed to condition your thinking or consciousness. Put yourself in a frame in which you are imprisoned, and any path that has been followed should therefore be a way which again should be got rid of once you reach the goal. In this sense, all paths of religion or practices are called unimportant ones. The important thing is the goal. Dharma is known as apradhanam, the unimportant one, because it is only a path. Any concept of or concepts imbibed into our minds in the understanding of dharma should also be left. The consciousness must remain totally independent of preferences, beliefs or disbeliefs. That state is reached only when we are all aware that the path is only a path which has to be left after its purpose is fulfilled. That freedom from all conditioning should always be there at the back of our minds, even when we are travelers on the path. Every experience in this life, whether it is suffering or happiness, has to be taken. Every event, every experience has to be taken as a teaching and reminds us of our purpose of living. That is to become immune and totally being independent of the changes of weather in our mind. We may go through a fair weather in life for a while, and it may certainly followed by rough weather. Peace is nothing but independence from sorrow and happiness. If sorrow is an emotion and a condition, happiness is also a condition. Both these states should have no power of binding on the self, should exercise no influence on the self. We should be able to live and sail through the life with steadfastness and unswerving faith in our ability to reach the goal. Come what may, let us all be assured of one thing. Since it is the purpose of God to create and allow the soul to reach Him through its journey in this life, His grace, help, assistance, and all service to us shall always accompany us if it is our purpose to reach Him. Those prayers that seek union with Him are always answered because that is the purpose of God, that is the goal of God, and that He had in Him when He created the world for the benefit of the souls. So God's grace is never denied. If it is not again conditioned by any considerations of one's eligibility to receive it. Since even the greatest thinker and scholar of all Shastras is no better qualified to reach God than the most ignorant one, it is only the honest and firm desire to reach God qualifies a man to reach God. The relative eligibility and ineligibility can exist only in some material objects in life, but not when the purpose is to reach God and that state of wisdom from where there could be no change. In this sense, God is not love and kindness when our day-to-day life is concerned, because we go through the results of our own karma, and God is all love, kindness, and grace when the path of redemption is taken up and when He is approached for help in that direction. To find a master in life is a sure sign of God's grace, and that God's grace has descended upon us because in our long journey in this world, we had already reached a state when we have crossed the thresholds of ignorance. We have realized the importance of release. When a person realizes that he has to follow the path of realization, it obviously means he has enough of this world. He has seen all the good and bad of this material world in his past lives, and he had honestly come to the point of asking for peace here and total release after this. That kind of a desire is not to be expected in a bonded mind. That itself is a proof that God has come to recognize you. God is the giver of master to you. Master is the greatest reward to the seeker from God. That has been the ancient path, belief and tradition in India. The Rishis were the first creation of Brahma. Later he created at another point of time the evil. First the Rakshasas and later the gods were created. First the guides to the souls were created. The evil followed to give the souls a taste of what is undesirable. Gods were created to give temporarily needed material relief from suffering. The Rishis are our masters, and we go back to them after a long journey of suffering, vacillation, doubt, ignorance, and all that. The masters wait for the souls to come to them. Till then, master has no role to play. Treat everything as unimportant. In this creation, the Puranas say that there are 84 lakhs of species. Of them, the most fortunate is the human being. Fortune does not lie in being happy. It lies in one's being aware of his opportunities. It lies in his ability to find out how best he can serve himself. This is called wisdom. This wisdom is a special gift of God to mankind. All the species are taking their rebirth in this elemental matter according to the destiny. For example, the tree is very similar to the human being. It is born, it grows, it bears the fruits, suffers from old age, and then it dies. The same thing is common with the human being. But the main thing is that the human being is aware of his existence. He is thinking of himself. It is not as though the tree does not have a mind of its own. The mind in the tree is called instinct. That instinct is serving it only to preserve itself. If there is a cyclone, if there is a pest, or if there is any trouble to the tree, this instinct in the tree is finding a way out to preserve itself against the past, against the pest, against, say, any attack on its life. But at the same time, it is not thinking of its own existence or about itself. Therefore, we also have an instinct over and above that, a mind, Indian. Therefore, we also have an instinct over and above that, a mind. Indian philosophy has divided this mind into 4 stages. The basic mind is manas. It is closely attached to the body, its functions, and its communications with the outer nature. There is another higher level of manas that is called buddhi. It is discretion. It is a memory. From his previous experience, he knows how to react with what it sees and hears. The next higher level of mind is chitta, that is consciousness. It is conscious of itself. It is conscious of its surroundings. Then the higher one is ahankara, the ego. Ego is the closest one, closest level of mind to the soul in the body. That is, the soul when it is embodied is possessed of chitta, that is the consciousness. There is no consciousness without the body, although the soul can exist. The soul in him is able to go into the body, its consciousness first, then buddhi, and then manas. In other words, self-consciousness, body consciousness, surrounding consciousness, discretion, mind, wisdom, and everything follows. These things are totally absent in a tree. These things are present in the animal kingdom and birds, but not so developed. At the most, they are serving their very physical security and existence. God, in his great love of mankind, all life of all souls, provided this nature to the souls in order the soul may evolve over a number of births, whether it is through the trees, birds, animals, or whatever it be, the soul is progressive and ultimately acquire the human body. This mechanism of wisdom must have some purpose. Otherwise, why should a soul grow into a human being from animal world? There ought to be some purpose for this. That purpose, known to the mankind, approachable by man, realizable by man, is called the grace of God. Grace of God does not consist in our health or wealth, because they are part of this matter. Whatever he has already given us in the name of nature is called his creation. There is no special grace in this. God's grace consists of man's wisdom, which, if correctly used, can elevate himself. And to what level? To the level of God himself. This wisdom is therefore to be used by all of us, not for any physical happiness, subject or conditions, but to draw our attention to our own self, which is not far off to see, which is within myself and which can be reached. The mechanism and the path have been laid very clearly by God, and it is therefore a must to be achieved. This is called realizing the self and indirectly realizing God as the maker of this path, the mechanism and the possibility of achieving it. Nature has 2 directions. The human soul is not inert. It is a dynamic, absolute, pure, clean truth, not polluted by anything. Inherently, it is not polluted, but it is surrounded by pollution. That is the body. The self, therefore, must take the path of transcending this pollution and realize itself as that pure, original, permanent, imperishable, happiness itself, because it is the truth itself. It is in our experience that we feel happy whenever we hear the truth, whether the truth is good or bad. Truth itself is sweet. Our own son in the household comes to the parents and admits that he has committed a mistake. It may be a crime. The first reaction of the parent is to be happy, for he is speaking the truth. So, truth inherently has happiness in itself. Therefore, God, in His grace, having provided the nature to the souls for evolution, has also laid down the path in very clear terms. All knowledge that is necessary for man to evolve has been provided at the very beginning of creation and not at a later stage. The simple logic is, if God were to be a well-wisher of entire mankind, of all souls, He cannot delay this revelation to a future date. The very first human being that walked on earth must be provided with this truth. It is only then we can say God is graceful. There cannot be any revelation at a later stage. Later stage and latest stage. Whatever is happening in the history of mankind should not be called revelations, but recalling of old memories that have been given to the first man on earth, that has been forgotten, that has been brought back to the memory by someone at a later stage repeatedly. That is called the birth of religions. The primordial truth that has been given at the first moment of creation, we call it to memory again and again. Now, what is this in the path? The second question is, what can be this path? The ancient Aryan culture tells us it is nothing but tapas. Tapas is at once concentration and meditation. Concentration on the achievement of the goal and meditation on the path. One must be extremely serious and set upon his goal. The process is meditation. Any physical object that is known to us in this nature cannot be a perfect object of concentration. Concentration must be on the goal itself. Goal is self within, the nature of which is not yet known to the mind, the quality of which is given to us by learned men, and it is here that the Guru comes into picture. Guru knows the nature of the self, is also aware that it is there in you, is also fully aware that God's grace is equally distributed all over, and there is no greater man or lesser man. It can be achieved by anyone who seeks it. All that is necessary is the set goal, concentration on one's own achievement without allowing his attention to be diverted on things natural. It does not consist of anything like change of ways of living or dressing or eating or speaking any particular language or praying in a particular language and time. No, all these things are very basic things of nature. They don't matter at all. Concentration on the goal is an attitude. It is a condition of the self. It is a condition of the man, the real man. He may be speaking, eating, or doing anything in the world because all life is material. There is nothing like spiritual life. Life is material. Life is natural. It consists of elemental nature. The food, the hunger, the sleep, the thirst, all things are natural. All things are material. The inner man's attitude alone is concentration. It is a constant thing. It is not divided into periods or timings. There are no periods of concentration. There are no periods of meditation. Every moment in life must have to be dedicated to this constant attention. There are no physical techniques. There is only an attitudinal constancy. In this sense, we have to automatically start living in a different manner which others call when they look at us. He is leading a spiritual life because his attention, his concentration, his way of speaking, his way of dealing with things, his reactions to the things of life in difficulties or in happiness definitely sounds different. In this change of attitude, the basic human being who is interested only in material happiness, he develops a certain attitude. That attitude enables him to pardon a crime, to forget an offense, forgive an offender, ignore or not mind an offense of gain or loss, because he has no mental concentration on these things. His constant attention is only on his goal. In this manner, you call this attitude tapas. These are the basic qualifications for a seeker. A person who is indulging in everything that is natural and material and occasionally thinking of his evolution or seeking the goal is only doing part-time tapas. It does not lead men anywhere. He ends up where he began. The difficulties in life are bound to be there, and in fact, our first difficulty is our body itself. Any attention paid to improve the body conditions from its natural state of decay is a futile attempt. It is nature that decays. The amount of attention and the expenditure that we indulge to repair this body, to keep it comfortable, to improve its functions, repair it, and trying to think that it can be restored to its original youth is not wisdom. It should be left to its own natural process. Any amount of medical care or even yogic care has never restored a body to its youth. Great yogis have died like any other great men. So the yoga is totally different from the body. It is ego's concentration on itself. It is ego's purposive approach to itself. It can be certainly achieved ultimately by God's grace and by Guru's guidance. In fact, God's grace lies in sending a master, a help. A guru is at the same time the closest relative, your father, brother, mother, servant, your friend. In this sense, tapas has been defined as more helpful in the presence of Guru. Well, the Hindu mythology speaks of the demons. They are numerous. They did tapas and saw the forms of God and obtained boons. But it led to their destruction. What can it be due to? They did not have a spiritual guru. They knew the path to achieve the presence of God, but in a dual form. He himself is one ego. There is another ego in a different form standing before him. The state of duality is due to his own ignorance. He always thought that he was different from God, and therefore God is something totally different. Who is there to give him boons? This state of duality is due to ignorance, and he thinks his own inner self as God, who manifested this world, is capable of giving boons to himself and others. The purest presence of God in oneself does not lead to any kind of desires or their fulfillment. So the duality is ignorance and untruth. All of us do pray to God in a church or in a temple or a masjid to help us in some of our difficulties in life. But the yogi does not do so. But he tries to find a solution to his problems in the power of his own concentration. He concentrates his attention on God, not different from his own self, but as himself. And then by mere sankalpa, he is not only capable of solving his mundane problems, but even grants solution to others. This path, this yoga, is the identification of the self with God. Yoga is the word what is derived from the root yuj. Yuj is to join. Who joins whom? The ego identifies itself as God. These two become one. The state of duality is bypassed. It transcends it. After that, he is God. This path of tapas has been given to us even at the time of creation itself. It is not a development of mental sciences. It is not a stage of development of intellectual sciences. It has been there for the very beginning. It has been forgotten because the mankind went into a slumber. It often does. That is the power of nature around us. If I am hungry and if my food is delayed, my yoga samadhi is disturbed. That is the power of nature. We have to conquer that, and everything is natural, commonplace, and unimportant. Any little importance given to anything, it writes on us, it commands us. We become subservient to the things we pay attention to. This is the nature. One who thinks that his goal is important to himself, no other second one is important to himself, becomes a master unto himself. He becomes a yogi. He is on the path to realization. He ends up with unity with truth, non-duality, and nothing more to ask for. In this material world, there are 1,000 things that can give us disturbance, worry, and concentration on useless things, attractions, distractions, and so many disturbing factors. Even if you are the most powerful man ruling the whole earth, you are still incapable of solving all your problems. Dependence on someone all the time for something or the other is not real duality but living in multiplicity. This is called anushanga, or attachment to many things, and no attachment lasts for more than a minute. Every day, 100 things are our subjects to draw attention. In this process, our attention to our own self will be a casualty. It is lost. Rather than asking ourselves to be virtuous, ignoring difficulties, or pardoning enemies, the first realization should be nothing is important. If any importance is attached to anything, it leads to reaction. Reaction could be good or bad. If it is unimportant, we don't react at all. It neither makes us unhappy nor happy. This is the state of a sadhaka. Abundant concentration on the goal is the first condition to be ably fulfilled. The God is with you, within you, and everywhere. There is no place without Him. Where there is no travel from anywhere to anywhere to reach Him, He pervades all. That is the closest truth to realize. As long as the ego is disturbed with the outer seeking, external seeking, it no doubt shows the concentration on the purpose of life. But it is natural for the body to go around. Then we are submitting to the nature of nature. Ultimately, all things are achieved in solitude, whether it is practicing music, writing poetry, doing scientific research, solving a difficult mathematical problem. Solitude is the secret. All the great literature that has come to us, all the knowledge, science, technology, any kind of spiritual scripture, they are the products of solitude. The secret is in solitude. We can move in a crowd, in a festival, or on the street in a great city. Nevertheless, one can be with oneself. That state of self can be practiced. It can be achieved in whatever condition the body may be, whatever you are doing or moving around. Therefore, solitude has to be attempted and practiced without depending so much on the creation of a distant ashram or traveling a long distance in search of solitude. Solitude can be achieved within oneself. It is possible because there is grace of God pervading all over. One who attempts such things is granted success. Success is guaranteed because the rest of the things in life, like our children, health, our money, success in profession, these are the result of good deeds of past. That is called merit. But there is no merit required for spiritual reality because it is nothing material. Supposing you distribute all your wealth in charity, you will be a very wealthy man in next birth. If you have loved mankind wholeheartedly, you may have good and prosperous children. For every good act, there is a reward. But this spiritual realization is not the reward of any good deed because it is not material. It is there for the asking. It is for the seeker. It is not denied to anybody. There is no special qualification by birth. Man, woman, white, black, there is no difference. All these things are nature. Ultimately, the message is to treat everything as unimportant and Guru's grace is with the seeker. But for Guru's grace, your attention would not have been to the most important thing. The very fact that your attention has been drawn to this so seriously combined with sincerity proves that Master has given his grace to you. Grace is that of Master. Call it God's grace. Develop an attitude of solitude with your own self. Then you are not with nature. Then everything becomes automatically unimportant. Any attention paid to anything is drifting from self. Try to play the game of life. Who scores the points doesn't matter. But yet, game playing is pleasurable in a happy season. Solitude anywhere, even in a crowd. It is a state of mind, state of consciousness. You must achieve independence from surroundings, not depending on any external condition. Develop an attitude of solitude. Treat any event casually and as unimportant. Even death is part of nature only, not serious. Are we not parting with a friend or a close relative? It is not serious because it is natural. It is casual. It is, by the way, that attitude will give us a real solitude one day. In solitude, you will really achieve the goal. Ramana Maharshi's method.